Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are diving into a pretty wild geopolitical theory from our source, one that asks what's really going on with the US and Iran. So, right from the get-go, the source material presents us with a real head-scratcher. You've got US officials on one hand basically declaring a total, overwhelming military victory against Iran. And that's the official story, right? The line coming out is basically this. We've crushed them, but for some strange reason, the Iranians just haven't gotten the memo. So the problem isn't the strategy, apparently. It's just that the other side isn't playing along with the fact they've already lost. Okay, but here's where it gets weird. According to the source, what's actually happening on the ground? Well, it tells a completely different story. And this creates this massive gap between what's being said and what's being done. And the source points to a very specific number to back this up. $14 billion. This is supposedly how much Iran made after a U.S. Treasury decision unsanctioned its oil. Now, to give you some context here, Iran's entire military budget for a year is about $10 billion. So, yeah. Which, of course, raises the obvious question, why on earth would you basically fund your enemy's war machine while you're trying to defeat them? It just doesn't add up. So, what is the real strategy? Well, the source suggests that to understand this, you have to look at two totally clashing ways of thinking. All right, so let's dig into that. To solve this puzzle, the source breaks down the completely different rulebooks that the US and Iran are supposedly playing by. It's really a clash of doctrines. So on one side, you have the US strategy, which the source calls a military-first approach. The idea is you come up with a military plan, and then you try to force everything else, the news, politics, even the economy, to fit that plan. But then you have Iran's strategy, which is shown as the complete opposite. They're supposedly using their military more like a scalpel, a tool to carefully shape reality to get the political and economic results they want. And as you can imagine, these two approaches lead to wildly different results. The US approach is described as being really rigid, kind of brittle. When things don't go according to plan, they just double down on what's not working. Iran, on the other hand, is painted as being much more flexible, more resilient. They can pivot, adapt, and somehow even manage to get new allies and boost their economy, all while the conflict is still going on. Okay, so all of this builds up to the theory's central and honestly its most mind-bending claim, and it's this. This whole conflict, it's not really about the US versus Iran. It's an audition. The argument here goes something like this. The so-called game masters, think global finance, they need a powerful empire to be the enforcer, the muscle for the whole global system. And, according to the theory, they've decided the US just isn't up to the job anymore. And where's the problem? The source points its finger directly at the US military-industrial complex. It's described as being the heart of the corruption. The argument is that it's not actually designed to win wars. No, its purpose is to create never-ending wars, which act like a giant pipeline to funnel taxpayer money to a global elite. And to show you the sheer scale of what they're talking about, the source brings up some jaw-dropping numbers. For instance, that $2 trillion the Pentagon supposedly couldn't find, right, on September 10th, 2001? It's a figure that's meant to just stop you in your tracks. You look at the numbers, and the US makes up a whopping 41% of all military spending on the entire planet. But the theory argues that all that money doesn't actually buy you effectiveness. Instead, it just points to massive, massive waste and corruption that's actually making the US weaker, not stronger. And the theory gets really specific with its examples here. It's talking about super expensive weapon systems that just don't seem to work in the real world. Like Patriot missiles that can't handle cheap drones. Or a $100 million fighter jet getting taken down by old-school radar. Or get this, a $13 billion aircraft carrier that had to be pulled from a fight after just 3 weeks because it was basically useless. The point they're making is that the US just can't flex its muscles like it used to. So, okay. If the US is failing the audition, who's next in line? Well, the theory puts forward Israel, and it frames it with this really interesting venture capital analogy. Think of the US as Company A. It's huge, it's got all the resources, but it's kind of gotten lazy and doesn't have the will to fight. Then there's Company B, Israel. It's smaller for sure, but it has this intense, single-minded determination. It's willing to do whatever it takes. For the global elite looking for a return on their investment, which one sounds like the smarter bet? And this all sets the stage for the theory's endgame, a concept it calls the Pax Judaica. This is a vision of a brand new order in the Middle East, one that's built on the ashes of a U.S. retreat from the region. So, in this hypothetical future, Israel steps up to the plate. It would take control of the region's massive oil and gas fields, become the central hub for major trade routes, and dominate with AI and surveillance tech. Essentially, it proves it can be that muscle the global system needs, but in a much leaner, meaner, and more efficient way than the U.S. ever was. But wait, here's where the theory throws a real curveball. You'd think Iran would be crushed in this scenario, right? Nope. The theory says Iran also comes out of this thing stronger. It becomes the other major power in the region, controlling its own critical trade routes and cashing in with sanctions relief. So this is the big question, isn't it? How in the world could two mortal enemies, like Israel and Iran, suddenly coexist, let alone thrive together? Well, the source says the answer lies in the cold, hard logic of geopolitics. It's all about game theory. The whole argument really hinges on three simple rules of geopolitics, as laid out by the source. First, the strong respect each other, and they go after the weak. Second, the weak, well, they're not very good at teaming up. And third, if you're weak, your only real choice is to buddy up with someone strong to protect yourself. It's a brutal calculus where power trumps everything, including old hatreds. And that is the key to the whole theory. Once Iran and Israel have both proven that they are the two strongest players on the board, the game changes completely. It suddenly becomes way more logical and way more profitable for them to team up and carve up the weaker states around them, like the US and its allies, than it is to keep trying to destroy each other. So there you have it. That, in a nutshell, is the Pax Judaica theory. It's this speculative, pretty radical vision of how global power could get completely reshuffled. It's based on a brutal survival of the fittest logic where two new powers emerge from the decline of an old one. Now, the source is clear. This isn't a prediction. It's not a crystal ball. It's presented as a mental model, an intellectual exercise to get us thinking differently about these massive power shifts happening in the world. It really just poses the question, what happens when one empire starts to crumble and others are waiting to take its place? A lot to think about.